1 year ago, horrifying news for hundreds of local parents. A worker for one of our region's most prestigious child care centers arrested and charged for what he did to a child.
That incident, the Perez case, really changed us fundamentally. I mean, it rocked us to our core.
But our News 4 I-Team investigation reveals something that has never been reported before. That man already had a troubling history. Tonight, the head of that center sits down with our Scott McFarland to talk about what the I-Team uncovered and what's being done to prevent another predator from slipping through the cracks.
In D.C., finding childcare is not child's play. In a city already swelling with 700,000 people, wait lists can be several years long. Perhaps no place as competitive as Centronia. Its main campus is in Columbia Heights, and the wait list is 400.
Hola.
Once visited by then First Lady Michelle Obama and filled with a team of bilingual staff and a track record over decades of accepting families with limited means.
Centronia gave us everything we possibly could have wanted.
Brian Weaver, who's raising bilingual children, knew this is where he wanted his kids.
It really focuses on a population that needs that education.
Teaching Young Children magazine even featured one of Centronia's pre-K staffers to great acclaim in 2012. But the News 4 I-Team has learned that staffer had a troubling past. Juan Arturo Perez had a form in his file for inappropriate conduct in 2004 and a warning he'd be fired if there was another incident, according to an investigation by the D.C. Office of State Superintendent. Then, 11 years later, Centronia investigated Perez again, this time for allegedly touching a child on her breast and calling the child's parents, begging they let the child spend the weekend alone with him. Centronia suspended Perez. But that D.C. government investigation says something else. It says there's no record Centronia called police, Child Protective Services, or D.C. education officials to report it. And eventually they put Perez back to work at the child care facility. When you read the file and you saw that they knew he had a history and kept him, what'd you think about that?
I mean, it is a glaring blind spot.
Then in 2018, Perez's career would end. He's accused of sexually abusing an 8-year-old girl multiple times for more than a year. Police arrested him, and the center notified parents of the case and fired him.
This is still raw for us in many ways. It's only been a year.
Myrna Peralta, president and CEO of Centronia, agreed to sit down with the I-Team to address why those prior allegations were not reported.
That's where our judgment was wrong. We should have reported that immediately. We had no reason to think that it was an intentional act.
But you can't make a judgment call. You have to notify police.
That's right, and we didn't. The bottom line is that we failed in that instant.
Here's a guy who's a walking red flag who should have been terminated long ago.
Adam Rosenberg, executive director of the Baltimore Child Abuse Center, says Centronia didn't just break the trust of its parents.
D.C. has mandatory reporting laws. I mean, the failure to report in Washington, D.C. Has a maximum penalty of 180 days of incarceration or an economic penalty of $3,000 there.
It's a crime.
It's a crime.
That 2018 D.C. State Superintendent investigation of Centronia obtained by the I-Team shows a pattern of failures to report misconduct at Centronia. It lists 6 less severe cases in which Centronia failed to make required notifications to D.C. officials, including staff grabbing children aggressively and leaving them alone unattended.
Do you dispute the findings of the report?
No.
While the D.C. State Superintendent reports that Centronia had displayed a pattern of endangering child welfare, there was no license revocation or suspension. Instead, a 45-day restriction in late 2018 from accepting new children until corrective actions were made.
If this had almost been any other pre-K institution in the city that didn't have the kind of track record of and great good in the city, they probably would have shut it down.
They'd be gone.
I think so.
In a city starving for childcare slots, parents and D.C. School Board member Jessica Sutter wonder whether Centronia was too big to fail, too big to close.
Shutting down a center entirely, revoking their license, telling them they can't operate, leaves hundreds of parents without a place to send their children the next day.
Peralta says the incident has changed them. Every staff member is now trained on mandatory reporting.
Not everybody was being trained prior to this.
Not everybody in the administrative side.
A new compliance officer is on staff and 200 new cameras were installed.
It's not enough to get it right 99% of the time. That faltering or missing something can have a long-term effect on a child. And I don't want to live with that. And I don't think any of our staff do. As painful as that process was, we're better, I think, as an organization.
A failure to report suspected child abuse is investigated by the D.C. Attorney General, and OSSI said it referred Centronea to the Attorney General for investigation, but that agency would not confirm anything. Meanwhile, Juan Perez pleaded guilty to sex abuse, served nearly a year in jail, and is now awaiting deportation hearings.